Hey guys, tonight we drift back in time to the year 1492, standing on the sun-baked shores of Palos de la Frontera in southern Spain. You trudge along the docks, wooden planks creaking underfoot, salt tang on the breeze, the Atlantic's horizon stretching endlessly, a shimmering line of possibility and peril. You can almost taste the nervous excitement in the air, mixed with the briny aroma of tar and fish, while the three ships, Niña, Pinta, and Santa María, rock gently against the ropes, their sails slack, waiting for a wind that will carry them into history. You probably won't survive picturing how tiny these vessels are, each barely wider than a modern city street. Yet they are about to carry men across an ocean most Europeans thought was far larger than the sun could ever pierce. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, post your location and local time. It's fun to imagine where in the world we're all floating as we drift back 5 centuries. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ships themselves are a fascinating trio. The Santa María, Columbus's flagship, now is the largest of the three at roughly 70 feet long, a lumbering but steady vessel with a single deck and a high forecastle that creaks ominously in the waves. The Niña and Pinta, nimble caravels, dance lightly in the surf, their lateen sails triangular, ready to tack sharply with a favorable wind. You run your fingers along the rough, salt-stained wood of the deck, imagining the knots and ropes that have been worked over decades by sailors' hands, each line telling a story of storms weathered, cargo carried, and men who dreamed of distant lands. Historians still argue whether these ships were designed optimally for oceanic crossing, or if Columbus's ambition simply made them seaworthy by necessity, a debate that colors every nautical reconstruction. On board, the sailors shuffle about in the final hours before departure, some checking rigging, others murmuring prayers or joking to stave off nerves. You catch snippets of their chatter, rumors of monsters, vast underwater whirlpools, and islands that appear and vanish in a mist. Some carry talismans, little charms tied to belts, while others rely solely on experience and grit. You notice the smell of salted meat and hardtack, a permanent companion, and the occasional whiff of rum from a cask meant to dull the sharp edge of fear. The juxtaposition of hope and dread hangs thick in the air. Even seasoned seamen grip their belts a little tighter, aware that the Atlantic is more mystery than map. As the day wanes, the captain's call pierces the ambient noise, and the ships, once moored and inert, begin to inch into the channel. You feel the subtle vibration beneath your feet, the water slapping rhythmically against hulls. The cries of gulls overhead mix with the occasional shout of a sailor hauling rope, a chaotic symphony of anticipation. Behind you, the town of Palos recedes, the whitewashed buildings catching the dying light, their chimneys puffing gentle spirals of smoke. The known world falls away with every oar stroke, and you sense the beginning of a journey that will test every human instinct: courage, patience, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness. Remember the Niña, the smallest ship? Despite her modest size, she boasts a surprising speed, her hull cutting through the water with agility that belies her fragile appearance. You glance at the Pinta, named for the painted one, her hull striped in vivid hues, a detail meant to distinguish her from the other vessels at port, yet also rumored to bring good fortune to the crew. A quirky tradition, perhaps, or a superstitious attempt to charm the sea itself. Such customs punctuate daily life on deck, subtle rituals that historians still argue may have influenced morale and discipline as much as sails and rudders. And as twilight drapes over the Atlantic, you feel the pull of the unknown. This is not a leisurely cruise. It is an expedition that could last weeks, months even, with no guarantee of sighting land. You notice the uneven rhythm of the waves, the subtle groan of timber straining against salt water, the occasional sparkle of bioluminescent plankton illuminating the darkening waters, a tiny reminder that the ocean teems with life even in the deep, silent hours. Sailors whisper about sea monsters, giant fish, and waters so deep they could swallow entire villages. You smile, knowing some of these tales are tall, yet you also know fear has a practical purpose, keeping sailors alert, alive, and attentive to the slightest changes in wind or weather. By nightfall, the Atlantic becomes a silver mirror, stars glinting like scattered gems above, their reflection trembling on the gently rolling waves. Lanterns sway from the masts, casting eerie, dancing shadows across decks, highlighting faces tense with expectation, excitement, and quiet dread. You trudge across the planks, feeling each creak underfoot, and realize that what you see now, this fragile flotilla silhouetted against the vast horizon, embodies a unique blend of daring, superstition, and human ingenuity that will define one of history's most consequential voyages. Columbus's ships are no longer just wood and sail. They are vessels of hope, vessels of ambition, and, in the eyes of those aboard, vessels of destiny. The first night on the open Atlantic wraps you in a strange, almost hypnotic rhythm, as if the waves themselves are whispering secrets that only those daring enough to leave land can hear. You trudge across the deck of the Santa María, the woods slick with dew, the salty spray stinging your face, and notice how the stars, so bright here, far from city lights, seem to guide the course, each one a distant sun flickering in a void that feels both infinite and intimate. The wind catches the sails just right, filling them with a hollow hum, and you imagine that sound is the ship's heartbeat, a living pulse carrying you across an ocean. No European of the late 15th century has ever truly crossed. You probably won't survive picturing the magnitude of what lies ahead without feeling a little vertigo. Historians still argue whether Columbus relied primarily on dead reckoning, astronomical observation, or sheer intuition to maintain course. You glance at the helmsman, who squints into the dark, holding the rudder with a grip that seems almost spiritual. He murmurs to himself, reciting lines of stars and angles, while the ship slowly arcs westward. Meanwhile, in the shadows below deck, sailors try to sleep on narrow bunks, the smell of brine and hardtack heavy in the air. One young deckhand hums a tune he swears will bring good luck, while another, more superstitious, ties garlic and charms to his belt, just in case sea spirits roam these waters. Quirky rituals like this punctuate the long hours, some based on legend, others purely psychological. yet all part of the strange tapestry of life at sea. The Niña rocks lightly beside you, a smaller, more agile ship that seems to dart through the waves with unexpected ease. You watch the sails flare in the moonlight, reflecting on the cleverness of lateen rigging, which allows the ship to tack efficiently against the wind. It's a small miracle of engineering, really, given that the concept of oceanic navigation is still in its infancy. The Pinta, with her painted hull glinting faintly under the stars, shuffles rhythmically in the water like a cautious predator, aware of her larger sister, but not intimidated. You notice tiny details, a bird feather caught in the rigging, the occasional flutter of a rope loose in the breeze, and realize that everything on board, even the smallest elements, can influence the voyage. Below deck, the galley is cramped and dim, the air thick with the smell of cooking fish, salted meat, and the occasional splash of seawater that makes everything damp and slippery. Sailors argue quietly about rations. The hardtack, biscuits nearly rock hard, and salted pork, oily and pungent, are the staples. You munch a piece of bread, feeling the grain catch between your teeth, and think about how survival at sea depends as much on discipline and careful rationing as on wind and sail. Historians still debate whether the diets of these crews led to subtle deficiencies that weakened men, or whether their bodies adapted over time to the austere conditions. A question with implications for understanding endurance and human resilience. You pause to watch the horizon, the line between sea and sky blurred in the darkness. Bioluminescent organisms streak past the hull, leaving ephemeral trails of blue light, a natural spectacle that has surely inspired wonder and fear throughout history. Sailors whisper about water spirits, the mares of the deep that can capsize a ship with a single kick. You smirk at the thought, but even as you do, a chill wind rattles the rigging, reminding you that the ocean is unpredictable and alive, indifferent to human ambition. Superstitions, tall tales, and half-believed legends mingle seamlessly with practical navigation, and you realize this interplay defines the rhythm of life aboard these tiny vessels. Through the night, you notice how the crew maintains vigilance, rotating shifts to watch the dark expanse. The captain walks the deck with a measured, almost ceremonial pace, inspecting sails, checking knots, murmuring instructions, and offering quiet encouragement. You observe that leadership here is a delicate blend of authority, experience, and psychological insight, critical in keeping men focused and morale intact. You remember tales of mutinies and desperation, and the thought of isolation on an endless ocean sharpens your awareness of the stakes. Columbus's decisions, though bold, are constantly tested by the unforgiving Atlantic, a setting where one misstep can have catastrophic consequences. By dawn, the first hints of light streak across the horizon, painting the ocean in soft golds and pinks. The gentle rocking of the ship contrasts with the subtle tension among the crew. Some are awestruck, others wary of what the new day might bring. You trudge across the wet deck, feeling each plank beneath your boots, hearing the faint creaks that seem almost sentient in the early light. Below, men stir slowly, brushing off sleep, checking supplies, and whispering about imagined islands far to the west. The promise of land, though distant, keeps spirits buoyed. Yet historians still argue whether the psychological strain of the endless sea would have worn down even the strongest sailors, a debate that colors our understanding of human resilience in exploration. And so, the first night on the Atlantic passes, a blend of wonder, dread, and quiet observation. You realize that every gust of wind, every creak of timber, every flicker of starlight carries meaning. These tiny vessels, their crews, and the intangible currents of hope and fear create a fragile ecosystem, balancing ambition against the ocean's mercurial nature. By embracing both science and superstition, courage and caution, the men aboard the Santa María, Niña, and Pinta begin a journey that will become one of the most legendary crossings in human history. Every sound, every smell, every faint gleam of dawn is a brushstroke on the vast canvas of discovery, and you, standing there amid the gentle sway, are an invisible witness to it all. As the morning sun climbs higher, the sea transforms under its gaze, sparkling like fractured glass, and you trudge along the deck, squinting against the glare, feeling the warmth on your shoulders after a cold, star-smeared night. The wind has shifted slightly, filling the sails in a new rhythm, and you notice how the ropes hum with tension, a constant vibration that seems to pulse through the very bones of the ship. Columbus, ever watchful, leans over the rail, peering toward the horizon with that same unwavering intensity that made him both admired and feared among his men. You probably won't survive the sudden realization of how isolated this trio of ships really is. No landmarks, no friendly ports, only endless water and the occasional silhouette of seabirds wheeling in the sky. Historians still argue whether Columbus had a precise sense of longitude or relied entirely on latitude readings and dead reckoning. Either way, his methods required a deep, almost instinctual understanding of the winds, currents, and stars. You observe the helmsman adjusting the rudder, feeling the subtle pressure changes in the wind and correcting course almost instinctively. Below deck, the crew is busy with mundane yet vital tasks, patching small tiers and sails, securing loose barrels, and checking the quality of stored water, a task more crucial than any swordsmanship in these conditions. One sailor hums a jaunty tune to maintain morale, while another murmurs a charm he claims wards off the sea demons, a quirky mix of practicality and superstition that has always accompanied ocean travel. The Niña rides gracefully alongside, her nimble frame slicing through gentle swells. You take a moment to examine the ship's design, narrow, deep hulls that allow for speed and maneuverability, with lateen sails that make tacking against the wind possible. It's impressive considering the limited engineering knowledge of the time, and it reinforces why these vessels were chosen for such a daring venture. Historians still debate whether Columbus intentionally selected lighter ships for speed or simply inherited available vessels. Regardless, the design demands careful handling and constant attention from every crew member. You notice how each sailor moves with purpose, tying knots, tightening ropes, adjusting the sails, a choreography perfected through necessity and repetition. Salt spray clings to your skin, a briny reminder that comfort is a luxury of the past. You taste the ocean in the air and hear the distant slap of waves against the hulls, a rhythmic percussion that underscores the quiet tension of the voyage. Below, the men tend to provisions, hardtack, salted pork, beans, and occasionally a fish caught by a lucky line cast overboard. It's a meager diet, yet each meal carries a psychological weight, a ritual of survival and camaraderie. One sailor insists that drinking seawater will summon storms. He's never tried it, and you silently hope he never does. While another keeps meticulous records of rations, balancing scarcity against necessity. The sun climbs further, warming the deck, and with the light comes a rare visit from seabirds, albatrosses and petrels swooping low, perhaps scouting for distant land, or just floating along the currents. Their presence lifts spirits, a small, unspoken reminder that the world is larger and stranger than any map. You watch as a gull lands on the bowsprit for a brief pause, ruffling its feathers, and feel a fleeting connection to creatures that navigate this vastness without instruments or charts. Historians still argue whether ancient sailors interpreted such signs as omens or simply as natural occurrences, a debate that illuminates the blend of superstition and observation fundamental to pre-modern navigation. In the midst of these observations, you begin to appreciate the mental demands of long ocean travel. The crew alternates between vigilant observation and necessary rest, aware that even a single miscalculation can spell disaster. The captain consults his charts, noting the positions of stars, sun, and waves, while the younger sailors try to make sense of the shifting winds. You feel the tension between patience and urgency, the delicate balance of anticipation and caution that defines every moment at sea. Every rope tightened, every watchful glance, every whispered incantation is a thread in the tapestry of survival, tying together skill, luck, and human determination. By afternoon, the Atlantic has settled into a steady rhythm, a rolling cadence that carries both promise and foreboding. The sun glints off the waves in dazzling patterns, and you notice the subtle changes in watercolor, hints of currents and depth variations. The crew points out drifting debris, seaweed, a fragment of wood, or perhaps a floating bird carcass, and whispers of land begin to circulate, though skepticism tempers excitement. You probably won't survive the mix of hope and dread without feeling the tug of shared humanity, the fragile reliance on each other and the ships that separate you from oblivion. As the day wears on, minor crises arise. A sail chafes against a spar, a rope frays, a barrel tips, spilling its contents. Each incident is handled with swift coordination, a testament to the hours of training and innate adaptability among the crew. You watch them work seamlessly, voices quiet yet firm, gestures precise, laughter occasionally breaking through tension. The interplay of authority and camaraderie, superstition and skill, history and invention all coalesces into a living narrative of perseverance. Historians still debate whether such cohesion arose from necessity or shared belief in Columbus's leadership. Either way, it is this delicate human ecosystem that makes the Atlantic crossing possible. Evening approaches, and the light shifts to molten gold and fiery orange along the horizon. Shadows lengthen across the decks, and the ocean becomes a reflective mirror of sky. You notice the quiet resignation and reverence among the sailors. Each man seems to contemplate his place in the vastness, measuring courage against fear, endurance against despair. Below deck, the smell of cooked fish mingles with brine, and some sailors quietly pray, others smoke dried herbs, all attempting small comforts against the vastness outside. Quirky rituals persist, from whispered charms to songs to small games of chance, underscoring the human need for control, superstition, and hope in the face of uncertainty. As twilight deepens, you sense a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle change in wind and wave, signaling the onset of another long night. The ships continue their slow westward progress, and the stars reappear, sparkling like beacons of guidance and promise. You trudge one last time along the deck, taking in the ocean's vast emptiness, the fragile silhouette of ships against the fading light, and the hum of the wind in the rigging. You realize that every small detail, the tilt of a sail, a sailor's nod, the glimmer of moonlight on water, is part of a delicate balance, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience in an unforgiving environment. Night falls, wrapping the Atlantic in a blanket of deep indigo, punctuated by stars that flicker like distant lanterns, and you trudge along the deck, feeling the chill bite at your exposed hands. The moon hangs low and silver, casting pale light over the swells, and each wave seems to whisper secrets of sailors long gone. Hey guys, tonight we drift through this moment, imagining the creak of timbers, the scent of salt and tar, the soft murmur of voices below deck as men try to rest while the ship rocks endlessly. You probably won't survive the realization of just how tiny human endeavor is against this vast, dark expanse. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. It adds a strange kind of cosmic connection to our shared imagination. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Below deck, the crew shuffles about, securing loose gear and making sure the sleeping hammocks won't swing into each other or the walls. Salt-stiffened clothes are brushed and reorganized. Barrels of water and provisions are checked again, though everyone knows rationing has become an obsession. Historians still argue whether Columbus maintained strict naval discipline or relied more on the self-regulating fear of mutiny among his men. But the organized chaos suggests a delicate balance between command and necessity. You watch a sailor fumble with a stubborn line, muttering curses under his breath, and another chimes in with a half-serious chant against sea monsters, a quirky tidbit that seems both absurd and comforting. On deck, the Niña and Pinta lean into the dark, their outlines mere shadows against the pale shimmer of moonlight on water. Each creak and groan of the hull is magnified in the silence, sounding almost like a conversation with the sea itself. You trudge cautiously, noting the phosphorescent glow trailing the ships, a phenomenon caused by bioluminescent plankton disturbed by the hulls. One moment, it's enchanting, like a ribbon of stars spilled across the waves. The next, it's eerie, making the ocean seem alive with unseen eyes. Scholars still debate whether such observations influenced sailors' belief in water spirits or if they were merely curious natural occurrences recorded out of fascination. you take a moment to study the rigging under the soft moonlight. Every rope, every pulley, every sail is essential. A slight miscalculation could veer the ships dangerously off course. You feel the weight of responsibility, imagining yourself in the helmsman's boots, eyes scanning the horizon, hands steady despite the rhythmic lurch of the vessel. Below, the smell of salt, fish, and candle smoke mingles in the air, an olfactory reminder of human presence amidst nature's immensity. Quirky personal habits emerge. One sailor meticulously sharpens a knife, another counts knots in the ropes, a small ritual to maintain sanity in endless monotony. As you move along the deck, you feel the wind shift subtly, carrying a tang of rain or perhaps distant land, though no one can be certain. These small changes spark anxious excitement and whispered theories among the crew. Historians still argue whether Columbus relied on instinct, charts, or a mix of empirical observation and intuition to judge such signs. You hear the low murmur of conversations, speculation on currents, stars, and mythical islands, and realize how entwined superstition and science remain in human navigation. The ocean's vastness is both terrifying and mesmerizing. Waves rise and fall, carrying the ships like cradle boats on an endless sea. Every sound, the slap of water, the creak of wood, the cry of an occasional seabird, becomes amplified in the darkness. You notice the men's shadows flickering against the sails in lantern light, like ghostly echoes of their own efforts. One crew member, perhaps bored or braver than the rest, tries to mimic the sounds of far-off islands, a half-joking attempt to ease tension. The blend of humor, fear, and vigilance is palpable, a testament to the mental endurance required for such a journey. Around midnight, the air cools sharply. Mist rises from the surface, cloaking the ships in silver haze. You trudge carefully along the deck, gripping the railing, feeling the moisture cling to your hair and skin. Each footfall is tentative, a reminder that even the smallest slip could send you tumbling into the black water below. Below deck, snoring, whispered prayers, and the soft rustle of blankets provide a rhythmic counterpoint to the natural symphony outside. Historians still argue whether prolonged exposure to such conditions influenced sailors' morale or simply hardened them into an acceptance of hardship. The constellations guide the journey. You notice the North Star, steadfast among shifting celestial companions, a fixed point in a universe that seems otherwise in constant motion. Navigating by these ancient guides, Columbus and his men created dialogue with the cosmos itself, translating starlight into directions and hope. Quirky traditions surface, counting stars for luck, marking favorable winds, whispering advice to the constellations, illustrating the human need for control over an uncontrollable environment. You reflect on how these rituals, though seemingly superstitious, provide psychological structure and continuity amid uncertainty. Hours stretch slowly. The Atlantic, vast and unchanging in appearance, offers little feedback but constant challenge. You watch droplets of condensation collect along the deck's edges, shimmer briefly in lantern light, and slide silently into the sea. The faint hum of wind through rigging acts as a lullaby, yet vigilance remains. The Niña and Pinta maintain formation, their lights and shapes barely visible through mist and darkness. A small splintered plank, a loose rope, a misaligned sail, each is a reminder of human fragility in the vast natural world. Some sailors quietly entertain themselves, spinning small tales, recounting legends of far-off lands, and sometimes creating humorous exaggerations of Columbus's supposed prophecies. You probably won't survive the amusement and fear intermingling in these tall tales without sensing a strange camaraderie, an emotional glue that holds the crew together. Historians still debate the veracity of such oral traditions, questioning how much was embellishment and how much documented observation. But it's clear these narratives shaped the voyage's social dynamics. As dawn approaches, the moon wanes, leaving behind a faint glow on the water's surface. The chill lessens slightly, and the first hints of pink begin to touch the eastern horizon. You trudge to the bow, peering into the still dark waters, noticing how the faint morning light reveals subtle currents and eddies. Birds begin to stir, distant and tentative, marking the arrival of day. Below deck, the crew slowly awakens, preparing for a new day of navigation and maintenance. The blend of sleep-deprived alertness and instinctive action continues, a dance honed over endless hours at sea. By first light, the horizon expands, revealing nothing but ocean in every direction. Yet, there's an energy in the air, optimism threaded with fear, humor mixed with fatigue, superstition laced with disciplined observation. You feel it all, the tension and relief, the beauty and terror of life suspended on the Atlantic's vast canvas. Every sight, smell, and sound is a layer in the intricate mosaic of survival, ambition, and the human spirit's capacity to endure. The morning sun rises slowly, painting the horizon in shades of gold and rose, and you trudge across the deck, squinting against the glare reflecting off the restless Atlantic. The chill of night lingers in the shadows, clinging to your clothes and the ropes of the rigging. Hey guys, tonight we follow the subtle transformation of darkness into day, and you probably won't survive the overwhelming quiet that accompanies the endless expanse of sea, broken only by the creak of timbers and the occasional call of a gull. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time in the comments. It gives a strange sense of camaraderie to our shared imagined journey. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The crew rises slowly, moving with the practiced efficiency of men long accustomed to living in tight moving quarters. Salt-stiffened hands grip ropes, securing the sails while others check barrels and provisions. You trudge behind them, feeling the rhythm of the ship beneath your feet, each swell a gentle but persistent reminder that you are entirely at the mercy of the ocean. Historians still argue whether Columbus enforced a strict daily routine or relied mostly on the sailors' understanding of necessity and mutual dependence. But the seamless flow of activity suggests a delicate choreography born of experience. The Niña and Pinta maintain a steady pace, their hulls cutting through the water with a low, thrumming sound that vibrates through your boots. A faint trail of foam marks their passage, and you notice the peculiar luminescence in the water, a trace of bioluminescent plankton disturbed by the ship's progress. One sailor attempts to scoop it up, marveling at its glow, an almost magical moment amidst the mundane tasks of daily life. Scholars still debate whether such natural phenomena contributed to superstitious beliefs among sailors, influencing legends of sea spirits or signaling omens. You trudge to the bow, peering over the side, and see tiny fish breaking the surface in shimmering arcs, while gulls swoop and cry overhead. The smell of salt, sweat, and tar mingles in your nose, and a quiet awe settles over you. Below deck, hammocks sway gently as men awake, rubbing sleep from their eyes and muttering half-formed plans for the day. One quirky habit persists, counting knots in the ropes as a meditative exercise, an almost subconscious effort to impose order on the chaos of an endless ocean. The wind shifts subtly, carrying hints of warmer currents. The sails respond instantly, catching the breath of the Atlantic and tugging the ships forward. You trudge along the starboard side, noticing how even slight adjustments to the rigging change the entire feel of the vessel. The teamwork required is astonishing. Each sailor's movement affects another, and a momentary lapse could ripple into chaos. Historians still argue whether Columbus relied primarily on intuition or empirical observation to read the wind and waves, but the evidence suggests a careful blend of both, honed over years of maritime experience. A faint morning mist begins to rise from the water, wrapping the ships in a soft, ethereal glow. Shadows stretch long across the deck, and you feel a sense of timelessness, as if the Atlantic exists outside ordinary human measures of time. Below, someone hums a tune, barely audible over the wind, and another responds with a half-whispered joke about mermaids hiding the compass. Such quirks provide moments of levity, small anchors to sanity amid the vast monotony of the sea. Your eyes catch the horizon again, searching for any sign of land, though you know it may still be days away. Currents shift beneath the hulls, invisible but potent, moving the ships imperceptibly east or west. You notice how each sailor watches the waves, reading them like an ancient language, interpreting color, movement, and reflection to predict the next hour. Historians still debate how accurate these interpretations were, but it is clear that skillful observation was essential to survival and progress on such long voyages. Breakfast, if it can even be called that, is a simple affair. Hardtack biscuits soaked in water or wine, dried salted fish, and occasionally a few meager vegetables preserved in barrels. The monotony of the fare is punctuated by brief discussions, debates about the stars, and recollections of homes left far behind. One crew member, notoriously superstitious, dips his bread in the glowing plankton water, claiming it will bring good luck. Quirky, yes, but entirely human in the face of uncertainty. You trudge back to the center of the deck, noticing how the ship's wakes intersect, leaving a lace-like pattern on the surface. A sense of awe and insignificance mingles in your mind. The ocean seems endless, yet you are part of a coordinated effort to master it. The rhythm of waves, the scent of salt, the creak of timbers, and the laughter below deck combine into a strange harmony, a lullaby for the vigilant and weary. A sudden gust of wind rattles the rigging, sending a flurry of small tasks cascading across the deck. Sail adjustments, rope tightening, and watchful glances to the horizon all happen in a seamless dance. You realize the mental stamina required is just as important as physical effort. Scholars still argue whether prolonged exposure to such constant environmental stimulation affected sailors' cognition, but anecdotal evidence suggests both heightened alertness and deep fatigue in equal measure. Around midday, the sun climbs higher, casting harsh light that glints off the waves. The heat begins to replace the morning chill, and you trudge carefully to avoid slipping on wet patches of deck. Above, the sails ripple, white against the blue, catching the wind and the eyes of any who dare to look without squinting. Below deck, hammocks are vacated, provisions adjusted, and minor repairs attended to, an orchestrated ballet of continuous, mindful movement. Conversations drift to distant lands, rumors of islands, and mythical creatures thought to haunt uncharted waters. You listen, amused and alert, as sailors mix practical observation with fantastical imagination. Historians still argue whether such tales were purely morale-boosting or genuinely believed by the crew, but they undoubtedly created a shared cultural texture that helped sustain cohesion. A quirky debate unfolds over whether Columbus himself encouraged these stories, using them as subtle tools of motivation. By afternoon, fatigue and monotony threaten morale. You trudge along, adjusting your own stance, noticing how even minor lapses in attention could affect not just your safety, but the operation of the entire ship. The horizon remains stubbornly blue, endless and indifferent, offering no guidance but a distant promise. The beauty of the moment, a sun-sparked ocean, gulls diving, sailors' quiet movements, is tinged with a subtle tension, a reminder that survival is a constant negotiation between skill and fortune. Late afternoon brings subtle changes, shifts in wind direction, faint clouds rolling on the horizon, and the occasional splash of a curious dolphin. You trudge past the rail, eyes scanning the water for patterns, thinking about navigation, tides, and the subtle clues hidden in sunlight and shadow. Historians still debate how much Columbus relied on celestial charts versus experiential intuition, but clearly both played a role. Below deck, laughter, muted conversations, and the faint scraping of tools mark the passage of time, a quiet soundtrack to the perpetual forward motion of the ships. The horizon stretches endlessly, and you trudge along the deck, feeling the gentle heave of the ship beneath your boots. Hey guys, tonight we explore the subtle tricks and techniques Columbus and his crew used to keep their bearings in the middle of a vast, indifferent ocean. And you probably won't survive the occasional wave that smacks unexpectedly against the hull. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And post your location and local time. It gives us a shared pulse in this imagined voyage. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. By mid-morning, the routine on board has settled into a rhythm. Sailors move with quiet efficiency, adjusting the rigging, checking supplies, and murmuring observations about the wind and the sky. You notice the subtle ways they communicate, gestures, eye contact, half-whispered instructions. It's a system honed through months of shared hardship. Historians still argue whether Columbus imposed strict hierarchical discipline or allowed the crew autonomy, but the harmony of movement suggests an implicit trust built over prior experience. The Niña's and Pinta's sails ripple under the wind, and you trudge past the bow, observing the water sparkling beneath the sun. Occasionally, small fish leap from the waves, creating brief arcs of silver that vanish almost as quickly as they appear. One sailor tosses a piece of hardtack toward them, joking about feeding the ocean. Fringe tidbit. Some sailors believed these tiny fish were messengers of Neptune, delivering omens for the day. Scholars still debate how much superstition guided sailors' daily routines versus practical observation, but it's clear both influenced morale. You trudge to the stern where the rudder is tended. Steering is an art, a constant negotiation with the ocean's subtle moods. You watch the helmsman adjust the tiller, leaning with the roll of the ship, feeling the ocean's push and pull transmit through the wood and ropes. Historians still argue whether these adjustments were guided more by instinct or careful calculation, but mastery of such tactile knowledge was essential. Above deck, the sun warms your face and dries the morning dew. The smells of salt, tar, and cooking fires mingle in the air, grounding you in the sensory immediacy of life aboard. Sailors discuss sightings of clouds and waves, using weather lore to anticipate changes. Quirky tidbit. Some would whisper to the clouds, believing it influenced favorable winds. You trudge past, half amused, half curious, and reflect on how belief and observation intertwine to maintain hope on these long, monotonous voyages. Midday brings a slight lull. Hammocks sway below deck as some men nap. Others chew on hardened bread or salted fish. You notice how even small tasks, like counting knots or mending lines, maintain alertness and mental discipline. Scholars still debate whether this monotony sharpened focus or contributed to restlessness, but the balance of activity and waiting was crucial for survival. The sky darkens slightly with distant clouds, hinting at a possible squall. You trudge to check the sails, feeling the subtle increase in wind pressure. The sound of snapping ropes and creaking wood alerts everyone to adjust immediately. Historians still argue whether Columbus relied on early warning signs or intuition to avoid storms, but the crew's experience clearly played a vital role. One sailor hums a tune to maintain rhythm while hauling lines, and another tells a story of a previous voyage where a storm split a ship in two. Quirky tidbit. Sailors believed wearing a rabbit's foot in your belt would ward off sudden lightning strikes. The mix of superstition, story, and practical knowledge creates a cultural tapestry aboard the ship, a shared psychological ballast in a vast, unpredictable world. You trudge to the lookout's platform, scanning the horizon. The ocean seems endless, a mirror reflecting shifting blues and greens. Occasional glimpses of distant birds hint at land, or maybe just passing islands of plankton. Historians still debate the accuracy of Columbus's reports of such sightings, but the careful attention paid to minor details is clear. By afternoon, fatigue begins to set in. You trudge along the deck, adjusting your stance against the swell. The sun climbs high, relentless, and the sailor's skin shows streaks of sunburn and salt marks. Some try to distract themselves by recounting jokes or making small wagers about how far they've traveled. Such quirks sustain morale and prevent despair from seeping in. Below deck, barrels of water and provisions are checked and rotated to ensure freshness. You notice the meticulous care in storing these essentials. Failure here could mean disaster. Historians still argue whether Columbus's provisioning was unusually thorough or standard for long expeditions, but careful planning undoubtedly contributed to their survival. Evening approaches, and the wind changes direction. You trudge along the deck, making small adjustments with the crew. The sound of water against hull, the creaking of wood, and the faint cries of seabirds become a lullaby, a rhythm to which all movement adheres. Quirky tidbit: some sailors carried small charms to communicate with the wind, tying knots and whispering prayers. Scholars still debate whether these practices were purely symbolic or psychologically beneficial in maintaining calm under stress. The sun sets, painting the waves with orange and pink hues. You trudge to the stern and watch the shimmering reflections ripple across the surface. The crew settles, some praying, some sharing quiet conversation, all maintaining vigilance. Historians still debate how much of Columbus's leadership relied on fear, charisma, or mutual respect, but the daily rhythms suggest a mixture of discipline and empathy. Night brings the cold and darkness. Stars emerge, guiding navigation while creating a quiet spectacle overhead. You trudge below deck briefly, hearing the gentle sway of hammocks and the low murmur of conversation. The night is a reminder of the vastness surrounding you, yet the crew's coordinated activity creates a fragile sense of order in the chaos of the Atlantic. Finally, you pause at the bow, listening to the wind whisper through rigging and sails. The ocean is vast, timeless, and indifferent, but within this endless expanse, you witness human ingenuity, superstition, and discipline intertwining in the daily struggle to traverse the Atlantic. The hum of the sea and soft creaking of wood signal both peril and wonder, a constant companion on this audacious voyage. Night fades into a pale, hesitant dawn, and you trudge along the deck as the first light catches on the curling crests of waves. Hey guys, tonight we delve into the navigation techniques that guided Columbus's fleet across the seemingly endless Atlantic, and you probably won't survive without appreciating just how small their window for error truly was. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And share your location and local time. Let's feel the same sun on our faces. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sailors are already awake, adjusting sails and untangling ropes with practiced efficiency. You notice the methodical way the helmsman uses the tiller, constantly feeling for the ocean's pulse beneath his feet. Historians still argue whether Columbus relied primarily on dead reckoning or celestial observations, but it's clear that his team needed both intuition and rigorous skill to remain on course. You trudge toward the bow and glance at the horizon. Early birds dip low over the waves, diving for breakfast, and the occasional dolphin leaps alongside as if cheering the fleet on. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors believe dolphins were protectors of voyagers, spirits guiding them through uncharted waters. It's easy to see how small comforts like this, tiny signs of life, kept morale afloat amid monotonous ocean stretches. By mid-morning, the sun climbs higher, revealing subtle currents and the gentle swell of waves. You trudge along, noting the way the sunlight changes the color of the water, a visual cue used by seasoned sailors to detect shifting depths and hidden shoals. Historians still debate whether Columbus could have read these signs with accuracy, or whether luck played a larger role than skill. But the observation underscores the blend of experience and attentiveness needed for survival. Below deck, barrels of salted meat and water are rotated carefully. The smell is faint but persistent, a constant reminder of the fragility of life at sea. You trudge past, noticing small rituals, sailors tapping on barrels, murmuring about the quality of provisions. Quirky tidbit. Some believe that talking to supplies ensured they wouldn't spoil, a superstitious blend of humor and hope. Scholars still debate whether these rituals had real psychological benefits, but they certainly contributed to keeping spirits up on long voyages. The midday sun beats down, and you trudge toward the stern, feeling the heat reflecting off the deck and the faint spray of seawater. The navigator unrolls a rudimentary map pointing to a series of lines and symbols representing known islands and estimated distances. Historians still argue whether Columbus's maps were meticulously accurate or largely imaginative, but the precision of his estimates, even if flawed, reflects a calculated approach to crossing unknown waters. You pause to examine the compass, a simple yet revolutionary instrument for the time. The needle's unwavering direction is a silent companion on this perilous journey. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors attributed almost mystical qualities to the compass, claiming it could sense danger ahead. Scholars still debate whether superstition or strict observation had a greater influence on decision-making, but both seem to coexist in a delicate balance aboard the ship. Afternoon arrives, and clouds gather in the distance, hinting at a potential squall. You trudge along the deck, noting the changes in wind and wave patterns. The crew springs into action, adjusting sails and securing loose lines. Historians still argue whether Columbus's decision-making during storms was guided more by foresight or instinct, but the quick coordination suggests a combination of experience, observation, and a healthy dose of courage. The wind shifts again, teasing the mass and creating a rhythm across the rigging. You trudge toward the lookout post, scanning for landmarks or subtle signs of approaching land. Birds circling in the distance catch your attention, a visual cue long relied upon by navigators. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes released small birds to determine wind direction, trusting their instinct over instruments. Scholars still debate the efficacy of these methods, but the combination of observation and ritual was undeniably part of the journey's fabric. Evening comes with a softer glow, and you trudge along the deck, feeling the swell of the waves beneath your boots. The sound of water against the hull is hypnotic, almost meditative. Historians still argue whether these long stretches of calm encouraged deeper reflection, or fostered boredom and anxiety among the crew. But the constant motion demanded both patience and alertness. Below deck, sailors mend torn sails, checking for salt damage and wear. You trudge past, noting how every small repair ensures the integrity of the ship. Quirky tidbit: some sailors would inscribe tiny symbols onto repaired sails for luck, a small personal touch on the machinery of survival. Scholars still debate whether these inscriptions had any real significance, but they certainly reflect the human need for ritual in uncertain circumstances. As night falls, the stars emerge, clear and brilliant. You trudge toward the stern, watching the sky and noting the constellations that guide their path. Historians still argue whether Columbus's reliance on celestial navigation was exacting or approximate, but his crew's survival depended on their collective understanding of the heavens. The wind softens, the ocean quiets, and the ship crests each gentle wave with a soothing rhythm. You trudge along the deck, feeling both awe and vulnerability, a mixture of human ingenuity and nature's indifference. Quirky tidbit: sailors believed that certain constellations whispered secrets of safe passage if watched closely. Scholars still debate whether this was a cultural superstition or an effective mnemonic aid, but it certainly influenced nightly vigilance. Finally, you pause at the bow, taking in the endless expanse. The ocean reflects the stars, the rigging hums softly, and the crew moves almost imperceptibly, a silent symphony of motion and purpose. Historians still argue whether Columbus's leadership or sheer crew resilience ensured the crossing, but the harmony of observation, skill, and belief creates a compelling narrative of audacity and endurance, carrying them steadily toward the unknown. Night stretches across the Atlantic like a heavy velvet curtain, and you trudge along the deck, your fingers brushing the cold, salt-slick ropes as the rigging groans softly above. Hey guys, tonight we linger in the darkness alongside Columbus's crew, navigating by stars that glimmer faintly through a scattered cloud cover. And you probably won't survive this journey without a touch of imagination to truly feel the peril. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you haven't yet, post your location and local time. Let's drift under the same constellations together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The waves lap gently, yet beneath them is the constant pull of the deep Atlantic, unpredictable and powerful. You notice how the deck creaks rhythmically, almost like it's breathing under the weight of the night. Historians still argue whether these ocean currents were fully understood by Columbus or navigated more by intuition and careful observation. But the sailors' survival relied heavily on reading each subtle sign. You trudge toward the bow, watching phosphorescent plankton swirl like liquid stars around the hull. Quirky tidbit: some sailors swore these glowing waters foretold storms or shipwrecks, a superstition rooted in the strange, hypnotic beauty of bioluminescence. Scholars still debate whether such beliefs helped maintain morale or simply amplified fear, but either way, the glow is mesmerizing. below deck, a lantern swings, casting soft shadows on barrels of provisions and the occasional rat scuttling nervously between legs and crates. You trudge past and note the faint aroma of salted meat and hardtack, lingering despite the open air. Historians still argue whether the quality of Columbus's provisions significantly impacted crew health, but maintaining an orderly stock was essential to morale and endurance over weeks of monotony. On deck, the navigator consults a crude quadrant, measuring the angle of stars above. You trudge toward him, squinting at the faint outlines in the dim night. Historians still debate the accuracy of these early instruments, but the method reflects a mixture of skill, careful measurement, and educated guesswork that guided the fleet forward. A sudden gust ripples through the sails, and you trudge to steady them, the ropes biting into your palms. Quirky tidbit: sailors would sometimes whisper small prayers or insults at the wind, believing words could charm or anger the elements. Scholars still debate whether these superstitions had psychological or practical significance, but they certainly kept hands moving and minds engaged. The moon rises slowly, casting silver paths across the swells. You trudge along the deck, feeling both awe and isolation in the expanse of water. Historians still argue whether Columbus's reliance on lunar observations was precise or approximate. Yet the nightly ritual of mapping the stars brought structure to an otherwise chaotic environment. You pause at the stern, hearing the rhythmic splash of oars against water as a distant skiff passes, a reminder of human ingenuity, even if temporary. Quirky tidbit: some crew members believed seeing another boat at night was a good omen or a warning from the gods. Scholars still debate whether these signs influenced decisions meaningfully, but they certainly colored the perception of fortune and misfortune at sea. The chill of midnight seeps into your bones, and you trudge back to the main mast, pulling on thick ropes to adjust a sail. Historians still argue whether Columbus's leadership maintained strict discipline or allowed improvisation, but the balance of authority and trust was critical in keeping the fleet coordinated during long nights. You glance over the side at the rolling darkness, imagining the depths below. The faint splash of a fish, the whisper of the wind, everything is amplified in the stillness. Quirky tidbit: sailors occasionally believed that the ocean below held spirits who could be angered or appeased, a thought that mingled uneasily with both awe and fear. Scholars still debate how these beliefs influenced risk-taking or caution, but they are a testament to human imagination in isolation. Above you, the stars slowly drift, and you trudge again to the bow, tracing familiar constellations, recalling lessons from earlier nights. The rhythm of waves, the constant movement of sails, and the quiet murmurs of the crew create a meditative environment. Historians still argue whether these repeated celestial checks provided real accuracy or psychological reassurance, but either way, they are a crucial ritual that maintains focus and hope. A lantern flickers behind you, casting long shadows over the deck. You trudge toward it, noting the map pinned nearby with approximate routes and estimated distances. Quirky tidbit: some sailors decorated their maps with small sketches or lucky charms, a blend of superstition and creativity. Scholars still debate whether these additions served practical or purely psychological functions, but they reveal the interplay of human ingenuity and hope during long voyages. Wind and tide shift gently, and you trudge along the deck again, noticing subtle changes in watercolor and wave behavior, clues to unseen shoals or deeper currents. Historians still argue whether Columbus's observations of water and wind were systematic or anecdotal, yet reading the ocean was undeniably crucial for progress and survival. As the night deepens, you trudge once more, feeling the steady heave of the ship and the quiet discipline of the crew around you. The combined effort of observation, skill, superstition, and sheer determination propels the fleet forward. Quirky tidbit: sailors often created small ritual charts to mark lucky days or favorable winds, blending folklore with navigation. Scholars still debate their actual influence, but their existence highlights how human behavior intersects with the unpredictable natural world. Finally, before dawn, you trudge to the bow once again, watching the faint light hint at tomorrow. The fleet moves steadily under stars and moonlight, each decision layered with knowledge, instinct, and hope. Historians still argue whether success was due to leadership, luck, or a combination, but the story of Columbus's night navigation is a testament to human resilience, attentiveness, and the persistent drive to reach beyond the horizon. The first fingers of dawn stretch across the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, and you trudge along the deck, still feeling the salty bite of the night air lingering on your lips. Hey guys, tonight we ride the fragile edge between darkness and light alongside Columbus's fleet, and you probably won't survive this morning without imagining the sheer exhaustion and tension in every creaking timber and rope. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop your location and local time. We're all sharing this quiet dawn together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sea shifts beneath you, a constant hypnotic rhythm, and you notice how the sails flutter gently in the morning breeze. Historians still debate how precisely Columbus's crew timed their shifts and navigation routines, but order and routine were vital to surviving the long months at sea. Each sailor, from the bowman to the helmsman, depended on the other, a delicate ballet of coordination. You trudge toward the stern, catching sight of the ship's wake, tracing a silver line across the calm waters. Quirky tidbit: some sailors believed that observing the ship's wake at dawn could predict weather changes, a superstition blending observation and myth. Scholars still debate whether such observations were genuinely predictive or mostly psychological comfort, but either way, it created a sense of vigilance. The deck smells faintly of salt, tar, and the lingering scent of last night's fire used for minimal warmth. You trudge past sleeping hammocks and rolled up sails, noting the quiet discipline that continues even in the soft light of morning. Historians still argue whether Columbus enforced strict schedules or relied more on voluntary adherence, but discipline was undeniably critical in maintaining both morale and navigation accuracy. As you trudge forward, the navigator points toward the horizon with a crude hand-drawn chart, indicating the fleet's estimated course. Quirky tidbit. Some maps included doodles of imagined sea monsters lurking beyond known waters, a mix of fear, imagination, and humor. Scholars still debate whether such illustrations were meant to frighten, amuse, or inspire vigilance, but they undeniably reflect the interplay between practical knowledge and human creativity. The waves catch the sunlight, glinting like shards of glass scattered over the water. You trudge along, noticing subtle differences in the color and movement of the ocean, which the more experienced sailors can read as signs of changing currents or hidden shoals. Historians still argue how systematically these observations were made, but practical maritime intuition often guided the fleet more than formal instruments. A gull cries in the distance, wheeling and diving above the water, and you trudge to get a better look, feeling a flicker of hope. Quirky tidbit. Sailors took sightings of birds as omens of nearby land, sometimes arguing for hours whether a particular species indicated the nearness of the shore. Scholars still debate the reliability of these avian signs, but they were crucial in maintaining optimism among crew who had been at sea for weeks. The creaking of the ship and the lapping of waves create a steady background rhythm, almost hypnotic. As you trudge back toward the bow, you glance at the horizon, trying to discern any shift in the faint mist hovering over the ocean. Historians still argue whether Columbus's visual cues for approaching land were consistent or largely intuitive, but the practice of constant observation was undoubtedly essential. Below deck, barrels of water and provisions wait silently, the faint aroma of salted meat mingling with damp wood. You trudge past them, noting the meticulous attention to storage and rationing, which historians still debate in terms of effectiveness, but mismanagement could mean disaster. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors marked barrels with small carvings or initials, both as a claim and a superstition, believing their personal symbols might protect the contents. The crew begins to stir with the light, voices soft and tentative at first. You trudge past, offering nods and quiet greetings, aware of the delicate balance between sleep, duty, and the relentless forward push across the Atlantic. Historians still debate the effectiveness of Columbus's leadership style, strict versus flexible, but the cohesion of the crew was vital for both navigation and morale. You trudge toward the central mast, hands brushing over rough ropes as sailors adjust sails in response to the shifting wind. Quirky tidbit. Some crews perform tiny morning rituals, like a synchronized tug on a rope or a whispered chant, believing it would bring favorable winds. Scholars still debate the psychological versus practical impact of these rituals, but the routine fostered coordination and confidence. The sunlight deepens, illuminating the wooden deck and the faint spray of salt water, and you trudge along, feeling the rhythmic sway of the ship beneath your feet. Historians still argue whether the navigation techniques relied more on celestial observation or instinctive reading of the sea, but the combination allowed Columbus's ships to remain on course despite limited tools. A sudden gust ripples through the sails, and you trudge to steady them, muscles straining but mind sharp. Quirky tidbit. Sailors often swore softly at sudden gusts, attributing personality or mood to the wind, a mix of superstition and humor that lightened tense moments. Scholars still debate whether this was merely cultural, but it clearly helped relieve stress during long voyages. The horizon shifts subtly, a line of cloud that might mark land, or might be a mirage. You trudge forward, the uncertainty prickling at your senses, a reminder of the immense challenge and constant vigilance required to cross the Atlantic. Historians still argue about the frequency of false land sightings during Columbus's voyage, but the anticipation itself shaped both morale and decision-making. As morning fully settles, the deck hums with quiet activity. You trudge to the bow, feeling both awe and apprehension as the sun illuminates the endless expanse of water. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes imagined shapes in distant clouds, interpreting them as omens or messages from the divine, a whimsical counterpoint to their disciplined observations. Scholars still debate whether such beliefs meaningfully influenced navigation, but they certainly shaped the mental landscape of the crew. The afternoon sun warms the deck unevenly, and you trudge through a haze of heat and salt, every plank beneath your boots radiating the fatigue of weeks at sea. Hey guys, tonight we slip deeper into the rhythm of Columbus's voyage, feeling the slow passage of days measured in creaking ropes, shifting sails, and the occasional burst of gulls wheeling overhead. And you probably won't survive this mental journey without picturing the relentless monotony and tension that shaped each moment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to post your location and local time. We're all drifting together across this imagined ocean. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past the mainmast, fingers brushing over coiled ropes, noting the subtle difference between the rope textures, hemp from Spain, coarser fibers from Portugal, and historians still debate whether the quality of rope and rigging directly influenced the speed and safety of Atlantic crossings. The ship hums with a quiet discipline, a sailor adjusting a line, another hauling a small sail to catch a stray puff of wind. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors believed that knots tied in the morning brought good luck for the day, an odd blend of superstition and practical task management. The ocean stretches in every direction, a glimmering mosaic of waves and sunlight. You trudge along, squinting at the horizon for subtle hints of currents, color changes, or birds, remembering that gull from yesterday that everyone swore was a land omen. Historians still argue whether these natural signs were genuinely predictive or more a way to keep hope alive among anxious crews. You pass the galley, where the faint smell of salted pork and hardtack mixes with the briny tang of seawater. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors claimed that chewing on a bit of hardtack soaked in wine made the days pass faster, a bizarre culinary comfort in a world of repetitive meals. Scholars still debate whether these small rituals improved morale significantly or were just anecdotes passed down by storytellers. The crew begins to adjust sails in response to a shifting wind, and you trudge to lend a hand, feeling the strain in your shoulders and the rhythmic pull pulse of effort that echoes across the deck. Historians still argue how much of Columbus's leadership relied on strict enforcement versus persuasive coordination, but it's clear the ship's movement depended entirely on collective attention. A sudden squall blows in from the southeast, whitecaps bouncing violently against the hull. You trudge to the windward side, bracing against the slap of spray, while sailors shout instructions over the roar. Quirky tidbit: some sailors believed that if you danced briefly during a squall, it would appease the storm gods, clearly more a morale trick than a meteorological solution. Scholars still debate the prevalence and sincerity of such rituals, but the mental relief they offered is indisputable. The waves glint like shattered crystal, and you trudge past a section of the deck where the sailors have carved small tally marks into the wood, counting days at sea. Historians still argue about the accuracy of these informal records, but they reveal the deep human desire to measure progress in a journey that otherwise feels endless. You glance toward the crow's nest and notice a pair of eyes scanning the horizon. Quirky tidbit: lookout assignments often rotated in unpredictable patterns, with some sailors claiming that staring too long at the endless blue could induce dreams or hallucinations. Scholars still debate the veracity of these accounts, but they highlight the strain on both mind and body during prolonged ocean voyages. Below deck, barrels of water are checked and rationed with precision. You trudge past the gurgling sounds of waves against the hull and smell the faint mildew of damp sails. Historians still argue whether Columbus's provisioning techniques were revolutionary or merely competent for the era, but mismanagement could be catastrophic. The sun dips slightly, casting long shadows over the deck. You trudge back to the mainmast and notice the subtle shifts in wind and cloud patterns. Quirky tidbit: some crew members claimed that the color of sunset reflected divine mood, and they interpreted each hue as a sign of good or bad fortune. Scholars still debate whether such interpretations truly influence decisions, but the psychological effect is undeniable. You pause near the helm, watching the helmsman make minute adjustments, feeling the tension in the wheel transmitted through the deck to your hands. Historians still argue whether celestial navigation or instinctual handling of the rudder had a greater effect on the course, but the skill of the crew was undeniably central to the journey. A lone gull circles overhead, and you trudge to get a better look, noting its flight pattern and how it rides the thermals. Quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes used birds as improvised compasses, believing their flight could hint at land, a practice that straddled observation and myth. Scholars still debate the reliability of such signs, but they were crucial in maintaining hope on endless days. The rhythmic lapping of waves against the hull becomes almost hypnotic, and you trudge along, feeling a blend of awe and unease at the infinite horizon. Historians still argue about the average daily distance covered by Columbus's fleet, but the combination of wind, current, and crew efficiency determined how quickly the Atlantic yielded its secrets. As the afternoon wears on, tension and exhaustion mingle with moments of quiet laughter, a mix of superstition, small comfort, and human connection. You trudge past sailors whispering old sea shanties, their cadence marking time. Quirky tidbit. Some shanties included made-up words or nonsense syllables, partly to sink labor and partly to entertain, a linguistic oddity that kept minds engaged. Scholars still debate whether these songs were widespread or localized to particular crews. The sun begins its slow descent, and the deck glows with gold. You trudge back toward the bow, taking in the expanse of water, the distant line of horizon, and the fleet moving as a single organism. Historians still argue whether Columbus's use of multiple ships was for redundancy, morale, or political show, but the coordination was remarkable. Evening settles over the Atlantic, and you trudge along the slippery deck, each step a cautious negotiation with the damp wood that gleams under the fading light. Hey guys, tonight we drift further into Columbus's voyage, feeling the shift from the relentless heat of day to the chill of approaching night. And you probably won't survive this mental journey without sensing the subtle anxieties that crept aboard with the darkening sky. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And share your location and local time. We're all navigating this imagined ocean together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first stars blink above, pinpricks of light that sailors had learned to trust. You trudge past the mainmast, noticing the sailors' quiet whispers about constellations. Historians still argue whether Columbus's navigators relied more on instinct or formal celestial training. But it's undeniable that their eyes scanned the heavens with a devotion bordering on superstition. Quirky tidbit. Some claimed that certain stars sang to them if you listened closely at night, a poetic but impossible notion that lightened the tension on long shifts. Below deck, the scent of salted meat mingles with the damp odor of the hold. You trudge down the narrow stairs and feel the uneven sway of the hull, each creak echoing like an anxious heartbeat. Historians still argue about the precise storage methods Columbus used for provisions, but surviving weeks at sea demanded both ingenuity and luck. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors believed that hiding a small coin in each barrel of food ensured a prosperous voyage, a blend of superstition and boredom-fueled ritual. On deck, the watch rotates quietly, hands gripping the ropes and rails as the wind picks up in playful gusts. You trudge along, sensing the subtle changes in air pressure and the faint smell of rain far to the west. Historians still debate whether sailors' informal weather observations significantly affected navigation, but these instincts were honed by countless hours at sea. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors would hum a melody believed to call the wind, an odd mix of rhythm and ritual that kept morale intact. The galley is a dimly lit refuge, with pots clanging softly as the cook prepares a meager evening meal. You trudge past and catch a glimpse of a flickering candle casting shadows on the walls. Historians still argue whether the menu was dictated by necessity or superstition, but salt, vinegar, and dried meat were constant companions. Quirky tidbit. Cooks sometimes added a pinch of ash to bread dough, believing it warded off illness, a strange culinary superstition that might have been slightly effective due to basic antibacterial properties. A sudden splash draws your attention. A wave breaks unusually high, dousing the starboard side. You trudge to the railing, heart quickening, feeling the cold spray against your face. Historians still debate whether Columbus's fleet experienced more storms than typical for the period, but records note several particularly treacherous days. Quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes kiss the plank after a soaking wave, a humorous superstition to acknowledge nature's power. You move to check the rigging, feeling each rope's texture under your fingers and the subtle tension as sails adjust to the breeze. Historians still argue whether Columbus personally handled navigation or delegated entirely, but the coordination required a blend of authority and trust. Quirky tidbit: some sailors marked knots with small symbols for luck, a practice that combined practicality with superstition. High above, the crow's nest holds a lookout squinting at the horizon, a lonely figure against the night sky. You trudge along, thinking about the isolation and responsibility of that post. Historians still debate how effective these lookouts were in detecting distant land, but their psychological weight was immense. Quirky tidbit: some claimed that if you whispered a sailor's name to the stars, it would ensure safe passage, a personal ritual that kept minds engaged during monotony. The wind whispers through sails, a subtle but constant presence. You trudge to the stern, listening to the soft lapping of waves against the hull. Historians still argue whether Columbus fully understood Atlantic currents, but his practical observations often guided the fleet successfully. Quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes left small offerings of food at the bow during storms, a blend of superstition and humor. The night deepens, and you trudge through the shadows of masts and rigging, feeling the rhythmic rocking as both comfort and threat. Historians still debate the psychological impact of long-term isolation at sea, but diaries hint at bouts of anxiety, boredom, and camaraderie in equal measure. Quirky tidbit: some sailors whispered to imaginary sea gods, claiming the act protected their dreams, clearly more for morale than reality. Above, the moon casts silver lines across the waves, illuminating foam and crests. You trudge along, mesmerized by the liquid light. Historians still argue whether navigation relied more on the moon or stars, but experienced sailors combined both with instinct. Quirky tidbit: a full moon was considered lucky for certain tasks, especially hauling lines, blending superstition with practicality. Below deck, some crew members drift into shallow sleep, hammocks swaying gently. You trudge past them, noticing the tension in their relaxed faces, knowing the slightest shift in wind could awaken them. Historians still debate how long sailors could safely sleep in short shifts, but exhaustion was a constant companion. Quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes tied a small bell to their belts to wake a partner if the ship lurched unexpectedly. You trudge past barrels of water, noting the careful rationing and the faint odor of herbs tossed in to discourage spoilage. Historians still argue whether Columbus's provisioning methods were superior to contemporary fleets, but discipline in consumption was vital. Quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes left tiny scraps of bread floating on top of water barrels, claiming the spirits of the sea would reward the crew's carefulness. The quiet is punctuated by distant calls, perhaps a bird or the wind through a distant sail, You trudge toward the bow, feeling a mix of fatigue and awe at the vast ocean stretching beyond sight. Historians still debate how sailors maintained morale during long nights, but a combination of routine, ritual, and storytelling seemed crucial. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors invented micro-games with knots and ropes, an odd precursor to modern boredom mitigation strategies. By midnight, the ocean is a black mirror with only the ship cutting a path through its surface. You trudge along the deck, listening to the subtle creaks and groans, feeling the connection between vessel and crew. Historians still argue about Columbus's leadership style during prolonged darkness, but coordination and shared vigilance were essential. Quirky tidbit. Occasionally, a sailor would sing softly to the night, claiming it soothed the waves, blending practicality with superstition. Finally, you pause near the helm, taking in the silver reflection of moonlight on waves. The night is calm, yet the promise of land remains distant. Historians still debate the exact course Columbus followed, but careful observation, intuition, and faith guided each nautical decision. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes left tiny scratches on the deck to count nights at sea, a simple act of human documentation that brought a sense of control in an uncontrollable environment. Dawn arrives slowly, spilling pale gold over the restless Atlantic, and you trudge along the deck, still damp from the night's spray, feeling every plank beneath your boots. Hey guys, tonight we linger in the fragile beauty of early morning as Columbus's fleet continues its trek, and you probably won't survive this without sensing the nervous anticipation of a crew who has yet to see land after weeks at sea. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And post your location and local time. We're all awake together in this imagined horizon. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is cool and salty, carrying the distant smell of wet rope and tar. You trudge past the sailors attending to early tasks, tying knots and checking sails, their faces etched with concentration. Historians still argue whether these early routines were more about discipline or superstition, but they maintained a rhythm that kept the fleet functioning. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors believed that chanting a short rhyme while hoisting sails prevented seasickness, a charming but ineffective ritual. Below deck, the galley emits the faint aroma of reheated salted meat and hard biscuits. You trudge past, noting how carefully the provisions are rationed. Historians still debate how much these rations sustain the crew nutritionally, but the monotony of the meals was likely worse than the hunger itself. Quirky tidbit. A few sailors secretly baked tiny bread charms with names of loved ones inside, a whimsical hope for protection and reunion. The crow's nest offers a dizzying perspective as the first light glances off waves. You trudge to the lookout point, feeling the gentle sway and the distant horizon pulling at your attention. Historians still argue whether Columbus's topmen could accurately spot distant lands or signs of currents, but their role was psychologically vital, maintaining hope and vigilance. Quirky tidbit. Some lookouts claimed they could predict storms by the feel of the wind on their cheeks, a mix of intuition and poetic exaggeration. You trudge to the bowsprit where the wind gusts stronger and the smell of salt is thickest. Historians still debate whether Columbus altered the fleet's direction using primitive understanding of trade winds, but careful observation of air patterns clearly influenced navigation. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes spoke to the wind itself, whispering wishes for steady passage, a bizarre blend of superstition and mindfulness. The deck is alive with quiet murmurs as the crew stretches and shifts after the night's work. You trudge between them, noting their shared glances and subtle gestures of camaraderie. Historians still argue whether social cohesion at sea had measurable effects on survival, but it's clear that mutual trust was indispensable. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes held silent competitions, racing from mast to mast as a way to maintain morale and alertness. In the distance, gulls appear briefly, skimming the water. You trudge toward the railing, heart leaping. Avian visitors often signal approaching land. Historians still debate how reliably Columbus used bird sightings as navigational clues, but these moments undoubtedly sparked hope. Quirky tidbit. A sailor once claimed that a particularly bold gull was a messenger from the gods, bringing omens of safety and supplies. The mainmast creaks under the early morning strain, and you trudge along the deck, feeling the tension in ropes and sails. Historians still argue whether these structural sounds were more alarming or reassuring to experienced sailors, but the symphony of wood and rope became a familiar rhythm. Quirky tidbit. Some crew members tapped out patterns on the mast to communicate with the spirits of the sea, a harmless if quirky tradition. The galley cat, a scrappy little creature, slips between barrels, eyes gleaming. You trudge past, smiling at the odd presence of a pet at sea. Historians still debate whether animals were actually kept for rodent control or superstition, but their company surely bolstered morale. Quirky tidbit. Sailors whispered that if the cat purred near the wheel, the winds would favor them, a feline talisman against the unknown. Sunlight glints off the water, creating dazzling reflections that make you trudge with squinting eyes. Historians still argue how much Columbus relied on visual cues versus rudimentary instruments, but his success required both observation and faith. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors held miniature mirrors to capture the sun's favor, a practice blending optimism with ceremonial routine. Below deck, hammocks sway gently as a few sleep through the early morning, bodies adjusted to irregular cycles. You trudge past, sensing the fatigue etched into every posture. Historians still debate how these sleep patterns impacted alertness, but short rests were better than none. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors whispered to each other about dreams predicting their fate, a playful fusion of superstition and boredom relief. The wind shifts, and you trudge to adjust the mainsail, hands gripping ropes that hum under tension. Historians still argue whether Columbus's corrections were precise or improvised, but his keen observation of the fleet's balance was critical. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes counted knots in the rope as a mental exercise, an early form of mindfulness at sea. The horizon remains stubbornly open water, a vast expanse of blue and silver. You trudge along the deck, absorbing the hypnotic motion of waves and sails. Historians Historians still debate the psychological effect of endless horizon, but endurance and hope defined survival. Quirky tidbit: sailors invented minor rituals like tossing coins overboard for luck, often in silent, humorous solidarity. The crew prepares for morning maintenance, scrubbing decks and checking rigging. You trudge past, feeling the satisfying friction of brush on wood and the salty spray in your hair. Historians still argue whether such routines were preventive or morale-driven, but the work unified effort and focus. Quirky tidbit: some sailors sang songs that made absolutely no sense, but synchronized their labor, like aquatic jazz, if you will. Mid-morning, a distant swell draws your attention, and you trudge to the railing, noting the rhythmic rise and fall of the waves. Historians still debate the impact of ocean swells on navigation, but observing and adapting kept the fleet on course. Quirky tidbit: some crew members tapped the water with small sticks, claiming it measured depth or predicted currents, a completely whimsical yet grounding habit. By noon, sunlight bathes the deck, and you trudge beneath the warmth, adjusting your hat against glare. Historians still argue whether Columbus relied on solar angle calculations or instinct, but the combination guided daily positioning. Quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes drew imaginary lines in the air with fingers, claiming it aligned the ship with destiny, a blend of imagination and ritual. You pause near the bow, feeling the subtle tension between anticipation and monotony, sensing the infinite expanse around you. Historians still debate how much the endless sea influenced morale, but the human capacity to adapt shines. Quirky tidbit: a sailor once swore that humming to the sea created favorable currents, a charming, if scientifically dubious, superstition. The afternoon stretches lazily across the Atlantic, sunlight slanting through rigging, and you trudge along the deck, feeling the gentle sway of the ships beneath your feet. Hey guys, tonight we drift into the slow, hypnotic rhythm of long days at sea. And you probably won't survive this without noticing how time stretches and bends, where minutes can feel like hours and hours like days. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And post your location and local time. We're all drifting together in this imagined ocean. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The rigging creaks as sailors adjust the sails to catch the shifting wind, their movements precise yet weary. You trudge past, feeling the rope's rough fibers under your hands. Historians still argue whether the sailors truly understood wind patterns or if luck played a larger role. But their repeated adjustments maintained course and morale. Quirky tidbit: some sailors believed that tying knots in a particular sequence could bind the wind to their favor, a practice more charming than effective. Below deck, the galley smells faintly of soaked hardtack and salted pork. You trudge past, imagining the bland texture, and note the clever ways the crew tried to make it palatable, often using seaweed or bits of dried herbs. Historians still debate how nutritionally sufficient these meals were, but they were undoubtedly vital for survival. Quirky tidbit: some sailors drew smiley faces in the bread with tiny charcoal marks, a small rebellion against monotony. The lookout perches high above, scanning the endless horizon. You trudge to the companionway, peering up at their squat silhouette against the sky. Historians still argue whether visual sightings of distant birds or floating debris reliably predicted land, but their vigilance offered hope. Quirky tidbit: lookouts sometimes wore ridiculous crow's beak hats to amuse themselves and ward off fatigue, a whimsical touch to an exhausting role. The mainmast groans under the strain of shifting winds. You trudge around the deck, noticing how tension in one rope affects the balance of the entire ship. Historians still debate how Columbus calculated these shifts, relying on both instinct and rudimentary instruments, but adaptability was key. Quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes whispered to the ropes as if talking to old friends, a superstitious yet soothing practice. You pause near the stern to watch the sun glitter off the rolling waves. Historians still argue how early sailors interpreted these glints as currents or portents, but they became mental markers of progress. Quirky tidbit: some claim that spotting a lone dolphin signaled good fortune or an approaching island, blending observation with hopeful storytelling. Sailors shuffle hammocks, readjust tarps, and chatter quietly to stave off boredom. You trudge among them, sensing the delicate balance of camaraderie and fatigue. Historians still debate how social dynamics influenced survival at sea, but a cohesive crew clearly endured better. Quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes enacted miniature mock trials over minor disputes, a mix of humor and order. You trudge to the bowsprit, where wind bites sharper and the smell of salt is thicker. Historians still argue whether navigation relied more on intuition or instruments like the quadrant and compass, but close observation of stars and waves guided the fleet. Quirky tidbit: some sailors recited nonsensical poetry to the waves, convinced that verbal rhythms calmed the sea's temperament. Below deck, a small rodent darts through provisions, and you trudge past, thinking of the eternal struggle between sailor and vermin. Historians still debate whether cats were essential or symbolic on these voyages, but their presence surely bolstered morale. Quirky tidbit: some sailors claim to interpret the rodent's behavior as an omen, an amusing but serious superstition. You pause to watch the sun shift, casting elongated shadows over the deck. Historians still argue how early navigators used solar position for guidance, but observation was always intertwined with luck and experience. Quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes measured the sun with improvised sticks and shadows, a rudimentary yet practical method. A sudden gust makes the rigging hum, and you trudge along the deck, gripping handrails to steady yourself. Historians still debate how Columbus adjusted to unexpected storms, but cautious seamanship minimized disaster. Quirky tidbit: some crew members swore that whistling a certain tune would charm the wind, a mix of rhythm and superstition. The horizon remains a rolling expanse of blue, hypnotic, and unbroken. You trudge along, imagining the invisible currents beneath, the slow march of days blending together. Historians still argue whether the endless monotony had measurable psychological effects, but resilience and ritual preserved sanity. Quirky tidbit: sailors sometimes collected small objects floating by, a piece of driftwood, a feather, as charms of progress and hope. By mid-afternoon, tension between crew members simmers gently. You trudge past, sensing the unspoken rules of etiquette and hierarchy that kept tempers in check. Historians still debate how much discipline versus camaraderie maintained order, but structured routines were crucial. Quirky tidbit: minor arguments were often resolved with playful duels of balance or agility, humorous yet effective. The crow's nest silhouette swings against the brightening sky. You trudge to the base, imagining the dizzying height and constant vigilance. Historians still argue whether these positions improved navigation or merely offered psychological reassurance, but they symbolized control over uncertainty. Quirky tidbit: some lookouts hummed or sang softly to pass the time, a melodic lifeline against isolation. The sun begins to tilt westward, casting golden reflections on the waves. You trudge along, noting the play of light and the subtle cues it gives about wind and weather. Historians still debate how effectively sailors interpreted these visual signals, but keen observation was indispensable. Quirky tidbit: some sailors traced imaginary constellations on the deck with fingers, blending education with entertainment. Finally, as the afternoon wanes, the fleet maintains a steady rhythm, sails taut, ropes humming, and you trudge along, sensing the invisible threads that bind men, ships, and the sea together. Historians still argue whether Columbus's leadership or sheer fortune determined success, but human ingenuity clearly prevailed. Quirky tidbit: a few sailors quietly sketched the horizon or small ships, personal mementos of the journey, blending art with observation, a subtle defiance of monotony. The golden light of late afternoon stretches across the rolling Atlantic, and you trudge along the deck, feeling the gentle sway beneath your feet as though the entire world is slowly rocking you to sleep. Hey guys, tonight we drift deeper into the long, hypnotic hours of Columbus's voyage, where time seems to fold in on itself, and you probably won't survive this without noticing the mind-bending monotony of the open ocean. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and post your location and local time. It's oddly comforting to imagine we're scattered across the globe, but sharing this mental drift. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease further into tonight's journey together. The sails stretch taut above, catching the last hints of the sun's warmth. You trudge past the mainmast, noting the tension in each rope, the subtle adjustments the crew makes to harness the wind. Historians still argue whether Columbus's calculations were guided more by intuition or rudimentary instruments, but adaptability and careful observation were clearly vital. Quirky tidbit: some sailors braided small strands of rope into intricate knots for luck, turning practical necessity into mini works of art. Below deck, the galley smells faintly of stew, salt, and a hint of moldy provisions, and you trudge past, imagining the repetitive monotony of meals. Historians still debate how adequate the food supply was nutritionally, but these meals sustained life and morale. Quirky tidbit: some sailors claimed that dipping their bread in seawater made it taste like adventure, a quirky psychological trick against boredom. The lookout perches high, scanning the horizon for signs of land. You trudge toward the companionway, craning your neck to imagine what it feels like to be suspended between sky and sea. Historians still argue whether sightings of birds or floating vegetation reliably predicted land, but hope often rested on these vigilant eyes. Quirky tidbit. Lookouts sometimes gave themselves ridiculous nicknames like Eagle Eye of the West, a playful distraction from loneliness. Tension hums quietly through the crew as they adjust sails and ropes. You trudge among them, sensing how human dynamics quietly maintain order at sea. Historians still debate whether strict discipline or mutual respect had the greater effect, but daily routines created a framework for survival. Quirky tidbit. Minor disputes were sometimes settled with harmless games of skill, a light-hearted, almost comical form of justice. You pause near the bowsprit to watch sunlight glint off the waves. Historians still argue whether navigators relied more on experience or chance, but observation clearly shaped decisions. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors whispered to the sea, convinced their words could coax favorable winds or gentle currents. The ship creaks under subtle gusts, a constant rhythmic music. You trudge past, feeling each swell through your soles and imagining the invisible forces beneath. Historians still debate whether Columbus fully understood ocean currents or mostly relied on empirical learning, but his success hints at remarkable intuition. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors entertain themselves by reading the patterns of foam and spray as if predicting future events, a quirky blend of observation and superstition. Below deck, shadows stretch across hammocks and barrels. You trudge through this dim space, sensing the quiet conversations, the suppressed yawns, and the occasional soft laughter. Historians still argue whether social cohesion determined survival as much as supplies, but camaraderie clearly mattered. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes whispered ghost stories to the waves, sharing myths of sea monsters and invisible spirits that helped guide the fleet. The horizon remains an endless sheet of blue, and you trudge along the deck, sensing how the monotony tests patience. Historians still debate the psychological toll of weeks without sight of land, but rituals, routines, and small amusements mitigated despair. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors scratched tiny marks into barrels or beams to track days past, a primitive but strangely comforting calendar. You pass the mainmast again, watching ropes hum in the wind, the sails fluttering with subtle imperfection. Historians still argue whether Columbus's fleet could have handled a severe storm better with different techniques, but skillful seamanship was constantly tested. Quirky tidbit. Sailors occasionally performed sail dances, stepping carefully across rigging in rhythmic patterns, blending safety and entertainment. By mid-afternoon, fatigue hovers lightly over the crew. You trudge to the stern and observe the horizon tilt, waves catching the last sunlight. Historians still debate how much the captain's temperament influenced morale versus chance, but leadership clearly mattered. Quirky tidbit. Some crew members hummed or tapped rhythms on barrels to stay alert, a tiny percussion section keeping time with survival. The lookout calls out faintly, "Birds! Starboard!" You trudge toward the bow, eyes scanning the horizon, heart quietly lifting at the potential sign of land. Historians still argue whether such sightings were truly predictive, but hope springs in these small moments. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes sketched the birds on scraps of parchment, blending observation with playful artistry. The wind shifts subtly, tugging at sails and rigging. You trudge past, feeling every shift through your fingertips, sensing the ship's response. Historians still debate the accuracy of Columbus's instruments versus intuition, but reading the environment was essential. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors carried tiny charms or carved talismans, believing they influenced luck on the water. You pause to observe the sun's descent, golden hues reflecting across the waves. Historians still argue how early navigators interpreted these shifts, but attentiveness and adaptability were crucial. Quirky tidbit. Some crew members traced imaginary constellations with fingers, mixing knowledge with whimsical practice, a small rebellion against monotony. As late afternoon settles, the crew's rhythm is steady, almost hypnotic. You trudge along the deck, sensing invisible threads connecting men, ships, and the vast Atlantic. Historians still debate whether Columbus's leadership or sheer fortune defined success, but human ingenuity clearly shaped outcomes. Quirky tidbit. A few sailors quietly carved small keepsakes from driftwood, tiny tokens of life and memory on the endless sea. The sun tilts low, shadows stretching long across the deck, and you trudge, feeling the day's warmth fade into the approaching calm of evening. Historians still argue whether prolonged exposure to such monotony forged resilience or merely delayed despair. But the ability to endure defined survival. Quirky tidbit. Sailors whispered soft jokes to each other to stave off gloom, a subtle, almost secret rebellion against the sea's oppressive quiet. The horizon darkens slowly, the sun now a muted ember sinking into the Atlantic, and you trudge along the deck, feeling the cool touch of evening settle over the ship like a soft blanket. Hey guys, tonight we reach the penultimate moments of Columbus's first great crossing, and you probably won't survive this without sensing the subtle mix of triumph and exhaustion in every movement, in every breath. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to post your location and local time. It's a quiet way of knowing someone else, somewhere, is riding these same waves with you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's final stretch together. The gentle rocking of the ship seems almost musical, a rhythm of survival. You trudge past the bow, noticing how the crew now moves with a practiced grace, each step measured against the pitch and roll. Historians still debate how much the sailors relied on formal training versus learned improvisation, but their cohesion was essential. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors would hum lullabies to the sea, convinced the melody could soothe both wind and water. Below deck, shadows stretch across hammocks and barrels, flickering from the last light spilling through the gunwales. You trudge quietly among them, imagining whispered conversations, suppressed yawns, and the occasional soft laughter. Historians still argue whether morale was primarily bolstered by hope, humor, or strict hierarchy, but all three intertwine to keep spirits intact. Quirky tidbit. A few sailors carved tiny images of the voyage into wood, a meditative distraction as much as a record. The lookout squints into the dusk, eyes straining for any hint of land. You trudge closer, feeling the chill in the evening breeze and sensing the heightened tension in the air. Historians still debate how accurate early sightings truly were, but every glimmer of hope reshaped the crew's mental state. Quirky tidbit. Some navigators claimed they could hear subtle tones in the waves that hinted at approaching shoals, a strange blend of science and superstition. Night drifts in gradually, and you trudge to the stern, observing the fading colors on the waves. Historians still argue whether Columbus's leadership style or sheer fortune defined success, but endurance, vigilance, and skill were undeniable. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes whispered short riddles or jokes to each other, tiny sparks of playfulness to fend off the oppressive quiet. The rigging creaks, sails flutter softly, and the deck hums with life and quiet fatigue. You trudge among the crew, sensing how routine actions, practiced movements, and shared glances knit them together against the vast, indifferent sea. Historians still debate whether camaraderie or discipline had the larger effect on morale, but both clearly mattered. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors collected tiny shells or driftwood pieces, treasures from the otherwise uniform ocean, a tactile reminder of the world beyond water. The last light clings to the horizon, and you trudge along the main deck, each step synchronized with the ship's gentle sway. Historians still argue whether the crew fully understood the scope of their achievement, but the mixture of awe, exhaustion, and anticipation must have been palpable. Quirky tidbit. Sailors occasionally made tiny, whimsical carvings of imagined sea creatures, combining artistic impulse with tales of the unknown. Above, the stars prick the sky one by one, and you trudge past, noticing how constellations guide navigation and imagination alike. Historians still debate the exact methods used to track latitude and longitude, but observation, experience, and rudimentary instruments intertwine to keep the fleet on course. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors whispered secret superstitions about star alignments bringing luck or misfortune. The night deepens, and the ocean becomes a gentle mirror for the scattered starlight. You trudge along the deck, feeling the rhythm of the waves, imagining the hundreds of unseen miles crossed. Historians still argue whether Columbus's crossing was inevitable with contemporary technology, but the combination of audacity, preparation, and adaptability cannot be denied. Quirky tidbit. Sailors invented tiny games or chants to mark ships, blending necessity and amusement to keep the mind alert. The helmsman calls out the subtle adjustments, and you trudge past, sensing the delicate interplay of wind, current, and human effort. Historians still debate how precise early navigation really was, but the ability to respond to constant, subtle changes ensured survival. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors tied small charms to ropes as talismans for calm seas and safe passage. Below deck, quiet hums, soft creaks, and the smell of sea and provisions form a comforting cocoon. You trudge among barrels and hammocks, sensing the blend of fatigue, relief, and the near-mythical tension of crossing uncharted waters. Historians still argue whether psychological resilience or tactical skill mattered more, but clearly both sustained the voyage. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes spoke to bottles and jugs as if the inanimate companions could share their burdens. Toward midnight, you trudge along the deck, and the Atlantic stretches like liquid night, infinite and indifferent. Historians still debate whether Columbus foresaw the lands ahead, but the combination of patience, faith, and observation carried them across the void. Quirky tidbit. A few crew members quietly recorded their own interpretations of constellations, blending astronomy with artful fantasy. A faint breeze brushes your face as the waves shift, carrying the promise of discovery. You trudge past, sensing the collective heartbeats of those around you, tethered to wind and water. Historians still argue whether luck, leadership, or preparation deserves the credit, but endurance is universally acknowledged. Quirky tidbit. Sailors sometimes tapped tiny rhythms on barrels to stay alert, creating a faint, improvised percussion ensemble that punctuated the night. The first whisper of land remains invisible, yet anticipation hums in every step. You trudge toward the bow, imagining the imminent horizon, the end of endless sea, and the promise of terra firma. Historians still debate the exact landfall locations, but reaching the Americas marked a historical turning point. Quirky tidbit. Some crew members composed small silent poems to the approaching land, private celebrations in rhythm with the waves. And now, as the moonlight glimmers softly across the water, you trudge slowly, sensing the culmination of weeks, perhaps months, of relentless effort and steadfast courage. Every creak, every sigh, every whispered word of hope threads together into the human story of navigation, adventure, and endurance. Historians still argue over many details, yet the narrative of crossing, of daring to challenge unknown horizons, endures. Quirky tidbit. The final night often inspired quiet laughter and whispers of absurd bets about what land would first greet them. The first light of dawn stretches lazily across the Atlantic, soft and golden, filtering through the rigging and painting everything in gentle hues of possibility. You trudge along the deck, feeling the residual chill of night giving way to warmth, and notice how the waves, now calmer, carry a different kind of rhythm, a lullaby for those who have survived the endless hours of darkness. Your eyes follow the horizon, imagining the land that waits just beyond sight, promising the culmination of a journey both terrifying and exhilarating. Below deck, the scent of salt and wood mingles with the faint aroma of provisions, lingering reminders of human presence against the vast, indifferent ocean. You trudge quietly, letting your fingers brush the barrels and ropes, each object a testament to preparation, endurance, and ingenuity. Historians still argue whether the ship's design or the sailor's adaptability mattered more, but clearly both played pivotal roles. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors kept tiny journals of the voyage, doodling imagined creatures and fanciful maps, combining art, superstition, and the human need to mark experience. The gentle creaking of the hull, the soft slap of waves against the bow, and the occasional bird's distant call merge into a soothing rhythm. You trudge to the stern, sensing the subtle vibrations underfoot, each one a pulse of the ship's life, a heartbeat of progress. Historians still debate how much the daily routines, from rationing to watch rotations, contributed to morale, but routine clearly anchored human minds amidst chaos. Quirky tidbit, whispered games and riddles were common, small mental diversions that kept alertness sharp and spirits lifted. As the morning stretches on, you trudge slowly, letting your gaze drift across the water, absorbing the enormity of the crossing. The Atlantic seems endless, yet human determination, courage, and careful observation have stitched a path through it. Historians still argue whether the journey could have succeeded without Columbus's leadership, but the narrative of persistence is undeniable. Quirky tidbit. Some sailors marked each day with small carvings on wood, playful symbols that combined superstition, artistry, and the urge to leave a trace. The wind carries a gentle warmth, the hum of the rigging a soft lullaby, and you trudge along, feeling the subtle energy of anticipation. The voyage has transformed both sea and soul, each wave a teacher, each challenge a reminder of resilience. Historians still debate the exact route and timing, yet the essence of human courage and ingenuity resonates clearly. Quirky tidbit. Sailors often shared whispered hopes or silly bets about the first thing they would see on land, private rituals to humanize the vast unknown. And now, as the sun climbs higher, casting a golden sheen across the water, you trudge to the deck's edge, letting the warmth seep in and imagining the first glimpse of land. The story of this crossing, of daring to challenge the unknown, lingers in every sound, smell, and sway of the ship. It is a story of endurance, imagination, and the human spirit reaching beyond what seems possible. The waves, the wind, and the sky bear witness to the courage, determination, and quiet moments of reflection that carried Columbus and his crew across the Atlantic. So, as you ease into this final calm, let the rhythm of the ocean, the gentle sway of the ship, and the lingering echo of human endeavor lull you into quiet reflection. Imagine the soft lapping of waves against the hull, the distant glimmer of potential land, and the warmth of shared perseverance. The Atlantic, once daunting, now feels like a companion, a gentle teacher of patience, courage, and the remarkable outcomes of endurance. And with each breath, each heartbeat, you carry forward a sense of connection to those who dared to navigate the vast unknown. The light brightens gently, not harsh but soft, inviting you to linger in the moment, to let the last remnants of tension float away with the tide. The journey may end, but its lessons remain, stitched into your mind like the constellations guiding the sailor's way. With the warmth on your skin, the gentle rocking beneath your feet, and the calm spread of light across the ocean, you can finally exhale, letting the story settle into quiet wonder. And so, dear listener, as the morning carries on and the Atlantic hums its eternal song, allow the sensation of this journey, its challenges, triumphs, and small human moments to fade gently into your awareness. Let it rest there as a reminder that persistence, courage, and careful observation can carry you across your own unknown seas. Breathe in slowly, exhale gently, and let the rhythm of this voyage ease your mind and calm your spirit.